Hi there, my name is Marley and welcome to my booktube channel. I love to read and I also have type 1 diabetes, and November is National Diabetes Awareness Month. So I decided I wanted to make a video this month dedicated to books and type 1 diabetes. So I'm going to be reading 5 books with type 1 representation in this vlog, and I'm going to be showing you a little bit about my day-to-day life living with type 1 diabetes. So throughout the last year or so, I have been collecting books that I've heard have type 1 rep, and those are the books I'm going to be reading in the next week or two. So I'm going to quickly introduce you to those books, but first I just wanted to do a little define type 1 diabetes for those who don't know what it is. So according to the CDC, if you have type 1 diabetes, your pancreas doesn't make insulin or makes very little insulin. Insulin helps blood sugar enter the cells in your body for use as energy. Without insulin, blood sugars can't get into cells and builds up in the bloodstream. There are a couple little graphics here on Google, which maybe I'll insert here. It says what causes type 1 diabetes. It can be a viral infection or a pancreas injury. Type 1 diabetes signs and symptoms are weight loss, frequent urination, that's a big one. I definitely experienced that one. Irritability, blurry vision, and fruity breath. But I'll talk more about my diagnosis experience later, and we can talk more about symptoms. I just grabbed some quick statistics from the JDRF website. These are American, even though I'm Canadian. But it says some 1.45 million Americans are living with type 1 diabetes. About 64,000 people are diagnosed each year in the US. And basically there's just been an increase in people being diagnosed with type 1 as years go on. So that is very worrying. All right, we'll talk more about type 1 diabetes throughout the vlog, but I just wanted to quickly introduce you to the books I'm going to be reading. So the first book I came across was The Girls Are Never Gone. And this one I saw Gabby over at Gabby Reads recommend, and she mentioned that I think the main character has type 1 diabetes. So that is why I put it on the list. This is a thriller book. Next up, in the comments of that video, a user named Sky of Diamonds recommended Arsenic and Adobo to me, saying there was diabetic rep in this book. I've since heard from Katie Colson, who is a type 1 diabetic booktuber, that it is not good rep. So we will see how this one goes. Then we have Blood Sugar by Sascha Rothchild, and I heard about this book from Haley over at Haley Hughes. In this book, we're following a female serial killer. It is a thriller, and her husband is the one with type 1 diabetes. And I've heard again from Katie Colson that it's really, really good diabetic rep. So I'm really excited for this one. Then we have The Mistletoe Motive by Chloe Liese. How I came across this one is I was listening to Christine from the Ruby's Digest talk about this author, Chloe Liese, and how she has a lot of disability rep in her books and all this cool representation, people on the spectrum and stuff like that. And I just wondered if she had any diabetic rep. So I checked out her backlist and saw that in this book, I think the main hero in this romance has type 1 diabetes. So really happy to have a more cutesy fun book on this list. And lastly, we have Sweetblood by Pete Hautman. And I found out about this book from Katie Colson's channel. I think one of her subscribers sent her this book because it has a type 1 main character again. Our main character is a teenage girl who thinks that diabetics are vampires, and so she thinks she's a vampire. This is an older book, so I'm wondering how the representation will be in here, and I'm wondering how it will be with sort of outdated technology and stuff, as I think it was released about 10 years ago. So those are all on my TBR for this diabetes reading vlog. I will try to leave some maybe more links and resources to learn more about type 1 in the description, and just keep watching to see my opinion on all these books. A general opinion and how good of representation I think it has, and I'll just sort of show you more of my life as a diabetic as well. Also, if you are not subscribed already, please subscribe for more bookish videos and reading vlogs like this. Hey guys, welcome to my first first reading update and a little diabetes related clip. I'm in the bathroom, as you can see. Hopefully you can't hear the toilet running too much. It's kind of making noise. But I've reached the halfway point in Mistletoe Motive. This is a Christmas rom-com, and I decided to start with this one because if you were following my reading in the months of September and October, I was reading a lot of thrillers and like dark books, so I just was really craving a lighter, fun rom-com. I don't normally have luck with Christmas rom-coms. I don't think I've ever really enjoyed them, but this one, it's going pretty well so far. I'm halfway through. I'm also going to be changing my continuous glucose monitor, which I wear on my arm. This is how I check my blood sugars throughout the day. There's still the old style of doing it where you prick your finger and test your blood directly. So I'll probably show you guys that later in the vlog just so you can see. But this is the more like high-tech way where this is just in your arm the whole day and you can like use your phone to scan it and show your blood sugars. I'm filming on my phone, so I can't really show you, but it would be, you know, I just tap it like this. Maybe I'll put up a screenshot of an example of like what it looks like when I scan my blood sugars, and you can see kind of like the graph of my sugars throughout the day, and it's just continuously monitoring those levels. It will give me alerts if I'm too low or too high, so I know to take action. But yeah, I change it every 2 weeks with this brand called the Freestyle Libre 2. There's a couple different brands you can do. So first we're gonna open up the box. Okay, we have some instructions, which you don't need. We have the little sensor in here. We have the applicator to put it on, and it comes with some alcohol wipes to clean the area. So I'm going to be putting it on my other arm. I just switch back and forth between the backs of my arms. That's where you're supposed to put it. I have just recently showered and cleaned this area. I didn't wash my hair, obviously. I also shaved this area just so it like sticks on better. So first off, we are going to clean up the area again with these alcohol wipes just to make sure it is totally clean before we apply. As for the Mistletoe Motive, so as I said, it is a romance between these two people who work at a bookstore, and basically it is a combination of The Hating Game and Book Lovers, I would say, which are two really popular romance books, so I think this would be really enticing for a lot of people. But essentially we have Gabriella, who is the sunshine, optimistic one who loves Christmas, and then we have Jonathan Frost is his name, which is fitting because he is the more like grumpy one that like hates the holidays. And they both work at this bookstore, they co-manage it, and they both obviously have different strengths for running the business because they're so different, but because of that they also butt heads and sort of like hate each other. It is like an enemies to lover, hence the Hating Game reference that I said. And honestly, it is so similar to the Hating Game that I think people will either love or hate that. You might love it if you love the Hating Game because it's just like a Christmas version of it, but you might hate it if you think it's too like copy and paste, because essentially the bookstore's not doing great financially, so they know one of them is probably going to be let go at the end of the Christmas season. They decide to enter this sort of competition, and whoever gets the least amount of sales is just going to quit and let the other person have the job. So that's similar to the Hating Game with them going for the same promotion, so they have that like competitive rival element to it. In terms of representation, there was a little like, I don't know what you would call it, but like a little notice at the beginning that the author put letting you know that there was going to be autism rep and demisexuality rep, which I think the author has herself. And then there's also type 1 diabetes rep, obviously, for the love interest. And she said that she got her references from her friend. We're also just letting this dry, by the way, so we apply it to a dry surface. It has that classic Hating Game thing where clearly it's Gabriella that thinks Jonathan hates her and she hates him, but as the reader you're like, he doesn't hate you, girl, he loves you. It kind of makes sense because since she is on the spectrum, she does have trouble with understanding social cues and facial expressions and stuff, so it actually does make sense that she has like totally misinterpreted a lot of their interactions, and she's kind of the only one that doesn't really get it. But it creates some really cute situations. I love enemies to lovers. I love when like the guy has fallen first. The only element I don't love, actually I'm gonna get this ready first. So we're gonna open up the sensor pack here, and then we are going to open the applicator. Always feels like you're breaking them. And then we're just gonna put the applicator into the sensor pack. Make sure I don't mess this up. Is this dry enough? We'll leave it a little longer. So it actually has the trope of them being online friends and not knowing it, which is also a pretty popular trope and not one I particularly like. It just doesn't do it for me. So they actually do communicate online. They met on Reddit or something. They do communicate online mostly about their love of books, and those parts are kind of cute. But we have a scene where like basically Jonathan figures out that he's speaking to her. Then I just kind of felt weird about it because I think there's like a weird power dynamic when one of them knows the other's identity and the other doesn't. But luckily he did put a stop to it. He like requested that they stop talking online. So I'm like, okay, good, because I think that's a weird situation to have one person knowing they're talking to them and the other person doesn't, if you know what I mean. Okay, so let's put this on. So as you can maybe see, there is a needle. It's never easy to see on here. And so I'm just gonna choose the spot on my arm to put it. I guess I'll choose right here, and I just put my arm down on a surface so that it's steady. So I'm just gonna do that here. And that was it inserting, and then I just like to wait about 30 seconds to make sure that it's really sticking on. But yeah, as I said, I'm really liking the book, even though it can be sort of annoying because it's like, girl, open your eyes, like he doesn't hate you. It's really cute so far. I'm really liking it. And as for the diabetic rep, as Jonathan is the one with diabetes, it hasn't been a main focus so far, but as a type 1 diabetic and as someone who knows that he has it, I have picked up on a few things. And so far it's been pretty good rep. Like Gabby and Jonathan were bickering at this one scene. She says that he like looks at his phone when it's beeping, and then he's acting like sweaty and sort of shaky, and then he like leaves the room, and she sees that as like him being rude. But in reality, I know that he is probably having a low blood sugar and needs to go treat it, and that thing on his phone would be the thing that I am putting on, which would be his continuous glucose monitor, which is attached to his phone, which is letting him know that his blood sugar is low. And then there was a point where like she just found out he has like this little candy stash in his car, which diabetics would have, again, in case of any lows. I always keep granola bars and candy in my purse because of that, and just little things like that. And I think it's going to be this big reveal when he tells her that he has diabetes, and that will probably be his way of like being vulnerable with her and opening up to her. Okay, and it is on. Let's make sure it's sticking. It looks like it is. So this one's going to expire in a few hours, and then I will take this one off and I will just activate this one by tapping on it. I just like to do it a little bit in advance so I'm prepared. But yeah, I'm excited to see when we get more diabetes rep, but so far that's been good, and so far I've been absolutely loving the rest of the book as well. To book lovers, enemies to lovers, it's great. It's me. Hi. It's the next day. I stayed up quite late finishing the book. It actually was a novella, which I didn't realize, but made it pretty short. So I was like, you know what, let me just stay up and finish this thing. I did speak a little bit too soon with my raving review last update. Basically, as soon as I got back into reading, a couple kissed, which was a little early for me. I'm definitely more of a slow burn girly, but the fact that it was a novella, like, it kind of made sense that it had to move quicker. But yeah, I definitely wasn't as big of a fan of the second half, just because the relationship did develop kind of too quickly for me, and then got a little bit cheesy, a little bit predictable, and some of the things annoyed me again with that component of the hiding their identities via their like online relationship. I don't know, the story just wasn't really hitting for me as much. The type 1 rep was good though, like he eventually shares that with her, and everything he said, you know, was accurate. It wasn't a huge aspect of the book, which was fine. I would have liked there being maybe a little bit more, but it actually was pretty good. And then the last chunk of the book is basically just smut, which again, if you know my reading tastes, you'll know I'm not like the biggest fan of those scenes. There wasn't much in the beginning, but just a lot at the end. It just wasn't really to my taste. Like, it was a lot of dirty talk, so if you like that, then you might like this. But yeah, I wasn't loving it, other than the fact that as she was, you know, exploring his body, she came across, you know, his insulin pump, which I haven't shown yet on the vlog. I do wear an insulin pump as well, and so I just kind of appreciated all of the talk about his pump. I have a tubeless pump, which again I'll show you later. He had a pump with a tube, so it did show how he like removes it during intimacy so it doesn't get in the way, and then has to put it back on after. So I definitely appreciated that kind of rep, like seeing type 1 and sex I guess, which we probably won't see in any of these other books. Yeah, it can definitely be annoying having like little devices on your body at all times, that's for sure. So in terms of rating, I think for the diabetic rep, I'm just gonna give it 5 out of 5 stars. Like, it was totally accurate. I think it was really good. As I said, the only thing to improve it would have been just maybe even more of it. As for the overall rating, I was leaning towards like a 4-star for most of the book, and then just I had to lower it as I got to the end, and I gave it a 3.5 star. So not bad, especially considering I'm not a huge romance person. I don't really love a lot of romance books. Yeah, that's the first one. First book done. Yay. Hey vlog. I'm nearly halfway through The Girls Are Never Gone by Sarah Glenn Marsh. And what this book is about is a teenage girl named Dare who has a paranormal podcast where she's going to investigate this case of this girl who died at this house, and people report having like spooky experiences there. She previously had a like YouTube channel where she would explore spooky buildings with her boyfriend, so she's kind of like famous a little bit from that, but they've broken up, so now she's starting her own paranormal podcast. But she's a little bit of a skeptic because she's investigated so many haunted places and she's never seen any ghosts or had any paranormal experiences. But yeah, she's going there for the summer to investigate and do her podcast, and while she's there, she's like helping out because they're gonna make this building into a museum or something. While she's there, there's a couple other girls who are also helping out, and then there's like the owner of the building, the new owner, and then she's just sort of learning about the history and like the previous owners. And obviously that girl that had died there in the 90s, she had drowned, and what was weird about it is that she was like skeletal when they pulled her out of the water, so they think that whatever killed her like made her become like skeletal, which is obviously weird to have that happen like so quickly. I will say the writing is definitely pretty amateurish. Like, it's just, there's something off about it, and it reminds me of when I used to write books and I would read my writing, and it's like there's just something off about it, right? Because it's not really polished or super professional, and that is kind of what this writing is in this book. Unfortunately, it's not terrible, but yeah, it's not the best. It's not flowing as well as a lot of books, so I think it would be better for like a younger audience because of that. And yeah, I'm having a little bit of trouble following it, but I was reading a lot of the first half on the subway, so I think that's why I was getting a little distracted. Or part of it is the writing, but I think now that I'm at the halfway point, like I'm starting to kind of understand everything. We're finding out that like there's been some other deaths at this house. We're finding a little bit more about the mystery. I have some theories already. Should I say them? I'll just say that like I think my theory is that it's gonna be a thing where like there are ghosts, but the ghosts are the good people that are trying to protect from like a real life villain, which is a trope I always enjoy, to be honest. Or I think it's not going to be paranormal at all and it's going to be like evil people. Either way, I don't think the ghosts are going to be evil. And then as for the type 1 rep, so our main character is diabetic and she's also bi, so we have some other representation here. She has a romance right now with one of the girls who's also staying at this house. I will say, like, at first I thought it was cute, but then they kind of like kissed and got together really quick, and then there had drama really quick. So I feel like I prefer like a slow burn, but I guess they're teenagers. So yeah, she's type 1 diabetic, and honestly it's really great representation. I looked up and the author is type 1. I think she's also bi or something as well, so it's like own voices, and it's really good. Like, it's really accurate. And you know how I wanted more of it in the first book? We're definitely getting more of it here, with the main character actually being the one who's diabetic, because it's like almost maybe every 3 pages there's a reference to her checking her blood sugars or something like that. She just changed her insulin pump site. It's doing a really good job of just showing how like diabetes is just something you're constantly having to manage throughout the day. The only thing is, in the US, which is where this book takes place, they measure blood sugars in a different way. So like in Canada, we measure by like millimole per liter or something like that. So for example, my blood sugars need to be between 4 and 7. Sometimes they go a little higher, like 10 to 13 or something like that. Sometimes they go even higher. But in this book, like her sugars will be like 160 or like 120, and I'm like, what does that mean? And sometimes I've seen that when I've watched like diabetic vloggers as well from the US. I'm like, what is that? I don't know what they measure in, but it's a different unit. So I have had to look up on my phone like a little conversion thing. So whenever she mentions like, oh, my sugars are going low because they're like 60, and I can see like, oh, what that means for me and how I measure it. But still, it's cool having those elements. And yeah, there's a lot of it. And she also has a service dog, which I have heard about, like dogs and animals being able to help diabetics and let them know when they're having a low blood sugar. And she has one of those dogs that lets her know, he like barks at her or whatever when she's having a low blood sugar. So that's cool. So definitely a good rep in terms of the diabetes stuff, but not the best in terms of like the writing and other stuff. So I'll check back in when I have finished it. So I finished The Girls Are Never Gone moments ago. It was a pretty spooky book, but I think my overall rating is going to be 3.5, just like the Mistletoe motive actually. And it probably would have been a 3 if not for the amazing diabetic rep, which I've already talked about. It was so good. I even liked how in the final big dramatic moment in the book at the end, she was having a low blood sugar as well, which has sort of amped up the tension, as that is obviously very dangerous and stressful. I also kind of liked that sometimes she would be feeling a certain type of way and she wouldn't know if it was her blood sugar or something else, which is something I definitely relate to. You know, she would be shaky or anxious, which are symptoms of low blood sugar, but also just symptoms of anxiety, and she wouldn't know if it was her blood sugar or just like how she was feeling, or if it was the ghost because it was like a paranormal story. And that's something I get. Like sometimes I feel a bit shaky and anxious and I don't know if it's just because I'm anxious or if my blood sugar is low. So the type 1 rep absolutely gets 5 stars. Like it was great. As I said, it was mentioned constantly, which is very much a true experience of a diabetic. But yeah, as the book went on, it just sort of started to drag for me. It seemed a little bit meandering and a little long, and then it did sort of get cheesy at the end as well. I didn't mind that too much. I actually didn't really expect what happened. Like it wasn't really one of my predictions that I had mentioned, so I kind of like that, but at the same time it was still a little bit cheesy and everything. And of course the writing, as I said, it wasn't my favorite. I do think it got better, or like the clunkiness of it got less noticeable as it went on, but I think it's gonna be just a 3.5 star. But I'm really glad that I read this, and I might keep an eye on this author's work, see if she writes any other books that have type 1 rep. But I think that's the only reason I would probably read any of her other books, is if it had to do with the type 1 experience. I probably wouldn't just read for her writing, if you know what I mean. So book number 2 is done. Tomorrow I think I'm going to start Arsenic and Adobo, and that's the one I have the least hope for, so we'll see how that goes. Alright, I am on a walk, obviously. Hopefully you can hear me because it's pretty windy. But I just thought I'd do like a diabetes lifestyle update this time. So as you can imagine, it's pretty important for diabetics to get exercise. I've basically found that like everything that's good for like the average person to be healthy, it's just like especially important for diabetics, because we're just more likely to develop other health issues such as heart issues and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I'm not the most active and athletic person, but I do try to walk as much as possible. I do live in a city and I don't drive, so I do end up having to walk around a lot, which is good to get places. Also, working out is good to regulate your blood sugar, and I also find that exercising will bring my blood sugar down. So there are like a lot of things that affect your blood sugars that you wouldn't think of. Like obviously food is what brings your blood sugars up, and then insulin is what brings it down. So that's kind of the basics. But as I said, exercise tends to bring it down as well. So if I'm going on like a long hike, or if I'm like swimming for a while or something, I need to make sure I have snacks nearby just in case my blood sugar goes low. Another thing I find affects it is like the heat. So in the summer when it's really hot, that can make my sugars go low. So I have to keep an eye on that. Okay, I'm feeling very weird filming in public. Also, hormones affected. So it's that time of the month for me actually this week. So time for my period, and I always find during that week that my blood sugars will also trend lower. I think it's different for different people. I've heard some people trend higher during that time, but for me I tend to trend lower which can work out because then I can eat more, and I'm normally craving more during that time anyway. And lastly, one of the big things that affects your sugars is drinking alcohol. I won't describe like the scientific reasoning behind it because I always forget, but alcohol brings your blood sugars down. So if I'm like drinking a lot, I need to make sure I'm closely monitoring my sugars and making sure I'm eating, because it can even have like a delayed reaction. While you're sleeping, your sugars might drop, or the next day. So you just really have to keep an eye on that and watch how much you drink, and just make sure your sugars are staying higher because they might just drop suddenly. So that's a little diabetic update for you while I'm walking. It is me with my 50% check-in for Arsenic and Adobo. Fun fact, I actually took a break from this vlog to film my blood marked vlog, which is up on my channel now, but I am back focused on this vlog now. It's actually World Diabetes Day today, November 14th. But yeah, I honestly was fine to take a break from this book because not totally loving it. Basically, the premise is this girl, Lila, was living in Chicago and had a fiance, and then he ended up cheating on her, so she came back to live with her family in this town called Shady something, which is kind of like a joke, I guess. So she's helping with her family restaurant. She's really into baking. That's her passion. And it's a cozy mystery. So we're, you know, being introduced to all these quirky little characters. And then her ex-boyfriend ends up coming in and eating at the restaurant that she works at with her family. And he ends up dying. And so she's the prime suspect, as it was at her family's restaurant. The last thing he ate was her food, and they are exes. So there's a little bit of motive there. And as the book goes on, it's seeming like someone is framing her because more evidence is showing up against her, but it was planted, like it wasn't actually her. I'm not loving this because, well, I haven't read that many cozy mysteries before. I've basically read Finlay Donovan and the Dahlia for Aunties series, and I did like both of them, and this is definitely reminding me of those books. I feel like cozy mysteries are all pretty similar, but I feel like so far the mystery stuff isn't as good as Finlay, and I feel like the comedy is not as good as Dahlia for Aunties. It's just sort of not hitting in any aspects, or not really standing out. I guess I'm kind of interested in what the mystery is going to be, like who the killer is going to be, so there is still hope for that. But something about the writing is not really jiving with me. I don't think it's that funny. The descriptions of food are good. Like, I'm very hungry reading this book, and so if you're like a foodie, you'll probably like that aspect of it. But yeah, the main character is not very likable, and I do kind of feel like there's some fat shaming going on. Even I feel like the girl is fat shaming her own dog. Then that can lead us into the diabetes stuff. So the guy who died, her ex-boyfriend, his name was Derek, and he had diabetes, and they never specified that he had type 1, I don't think, but based on his age and like I think he was pretty fit, like he was probably type 1. So when he was at the restaurant, a comment was made like, have you taken your insulin, because he was eating dessert, and he was like, yeah, I took it, whatever. So when he died eating a dessert, everyone, like the main character and her family, were like, well, he's diabetic, so probably it was from eating too much sugar, which is definitely like a myth, or like a stereotype that like diabetics can't eat sugar. Like, I definitely can eat sugar, like I eat a bunch of it, or like in moderation, whatever. So that's definitely like kind of problematic. And just the fact that the way they were talking about it was like, they keep saying like, oh, he's not very on top of his health, like, and they were acting kind of like he deserved to die in a way because he was eating dessert as a diabetic. Like, there's just definitely was some not great things about how they're portraying diabetes in this. And also like eating a bunch of sugar, like you don't instantly die as a diabetic. Like, just if I had one high sugar like day, like I wouldn't just die. Like, it just was not great, like maybe not the most well researched. I don't know if I mentioned it in the top of this video, but Katie Coulson gave like a horrible review of this, and so I knew that going into it. I knew it wasn't going to be good rep, but I just kind of wanted to read it anyways to see for myself. And I pretty much do agree with everything that she said. Maybe I'll like link her review somewhere. I'll like put up a screenshot or something of it. She was very passionate about it, and I honestly agree. And then even there was like a comment later on where Lila's best friend is like eating a lot of sugar, and she's like saying in her head like, oh, if I ate that much sugar, like I would have lost a foot to diabetes by now. It's just like a lot of like weird stigma about diabetes that's included in this, which I feel like I want to like get rid of with this video, and like we should be clearing up with it being National Diabetes Awareness Month. So definitely losing points for that. But even on top of that, like I'm also just not really enjoying the book that much. Luckily, I think it's pretty short, so hopefully I can finish it like by tomorrow and move on. It's gonna be a series. The second book might be out already, I'm not sure. I don't think I'm gonna want to continue it. I don't know, I just feel like cozy mysteries are not really my favorite, and it's like because they're so similar, I feel like pick one and that's it. Like I'll stick with Finley Donovan and like I'm good. Okay, time for another diabetic update. I thought I would show you how I test my blood sugars in the like manual way with my glucometer, where I test the blood directly. This is a little bit more of an old-fashioned way, as I said, but it's also the more accurate way to test your blood because you're getting those instant results from your blood directly, whereas the sensor that I wear is testing like the fluid between your skin and your blood or like something like that. It's not 100% accurate, and it's also kind of delayed as well. So if you just want like a more accurate testing, you think your technology might be glitching out on you or something, you can do this method, and a lot of people just prefer to do this. So I keep my supplies in this little warrior bag. Somehow it's gotten dirty, but ignore that. So I keep it in this little case here, and just a warning for like needles and blood if you're like sensitive to that. I'll try not to show it too much, but like just FYI. So here's a little machine here, and we are going to take one of these test strips and insert it into the machine. So they look like this, and I did already wash my hands, by the way. You definitely want to make sure your hands are clean. So we just insert it into this little hole here, and then it turns on to say that it is ready to test, and it's telling me to apply blood. So to get my blood, we're gonna take this little jabber here. I don't know what this is called technically, but there's a little needle in here called a lancet, and then you just hit this button and it will like jab out, and you do this on your finger. So you just pull this back and then hit this button. That didn't feel okay. So I just kind of push my finger to get more blood to come out, and then we put the test strip on the blood. And my blood sugar is at 7. Take a screenshot of what my blood sugar is saying on the app, but I think it was a little bit lower than this, so it's not 100% accurate, but pretty close, because I think I was like 6 point something. So yeah, 7 is okay. As you know, I'm supposed to be between 4 and 7. Wish I was a little bit lower, but oh well. And then you just have to get rid of the strip, obviously. I thought I would just also share a little bit about my diagnosis story, because I haven't done that yet. So basically I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes last year, so it actually has not even been that long. Like I'm just preaching about it in this whole video, and like I've had it for like less than 2 years, but I think that's why it's still such like a prominent thing in my life, because I'm still adjusting to it. But basically what happened to me was I was diagnosed in April of 2021. I was going through a very like stressful time with moving into this apartment, and so I think that's a little bit of why I wasn't totally paying attention to my health and didn't like go to the doctor sooner. But basically the main thing and the first thing that was happening was I was urinating a lot, like so often, like I'm talking like 7 times in the night sometimes. And I noticed it was especially when I would eat unhealthy, which now understanding diabetes, I understand why, because it was higher carb, so my blood sugar was just going so high. And I didn't know it because my pancreas just stopped working. randomly, and I didn't know that I had diabetes suddenly. I was also really thirsty, and unfortunately, like, it was torture because I was so thirsty, but then water started to taste bad to me, so that really sucked. I started to like hallucinate a little bit when I was sleeping. Also, my urine smelled really bad, like very strong, very bad. I think I was kind of having some chest pains as well. This was during the pandemic, so I'm like, is this COVID? But it wasn't. Eventually I just got so tired where I could barely walk down the street. I could barely stand to like cook in the kitchen. I had to sit, and I could barely stay awake when trying to work and stuff. So I eventually got my blood tested, and basically they told me, like, you have diabetes, like, you need to go to the emergency room. Oh yeah, I also lost weight. That was another symptom. So I went there. Obviously should have got checked out probably a little bit sooner, but I just wasn't really the type of person to go to the doctor. Now, ironically, like, I do have to go more often that I have this condition, but definitely go to the doctor if you feel like there's something wrong. Basically, they told me I was having a DKA, a diabetic ketoacidosis, which the official description from the CDC is that a DKA is a serious complication of diabetes that can be life-threatening. DKA is most common among people with type 1 diabetes. It develops when your body doesn't have enough insulin to allow blood sugar into your cells for use as energy. So I think a lot of people who get diagnosed with type 1 get diagnosed through a DKA because you just don't know that you're type 1 diabetic, so you're just having really high blood sugars for a long amount of time. Like, for example, my blood sugar was at 33 point something when I went to the hospital, and as I've told you guys, it needs to be between 4 and 7, so that's like really high, and I could have gone into a diabetic coma at that level, but thankfully I didn't. Yeah, I was in the hospital for a week. They, you know, hooked me up to tubes. They were giving me insulin, giving me other fluids and things that I needed, bringing me back down to a stable level. And then I was also like educated on type 1 diabetes from the educators there, and they taught me how to manage it and gave me some of these supplies that you've seen me use. Originally, I was using insulin pens to inject insulin, so it would just be like a little, I'll go get one. So it'd be a little pen like this, and you can see this is like full of insulin, and then you just put a new needle on every time and like do a singular jab rather than having like an insulin pump on you all the time delivering. So that was kind of annoying, having to like poke myself with a needle multiple times every day, like at least 4 times. Yeah, I got taught about that. Then when I was in the hospital, there was actually a complication where the nurse gave me too much insulin. The doctor told him to give me 15 units and he gave me 50. And that's a huge difference. And luckily it was like the slow acting insulin that takes like 24 hours. If it was the fast acting insulin, that would have been really bad. But I had to stay like an extra day in the hospital because of that. So that sucked. But yeah, that's my story. I was diagnosed at 24 years old also, which is a little bit old for type 1 diabetes. Originally it was called juvenile diabetes because people just thought it was only kids that got it. But now we know that adults can also be diagnosed. Like even older than me, you could still get diagnosed. So that's a little bit of my story and my journey. And yeah, I'll stop talking now. Hey, just got home from seeing a movie by myself. It was the first snow of the season as well. So not a super pleasant trip, but on my way, I finished Arsenic and Adobo. Glad to get that out of the way, to be honest. In the second half, there were no more diabetic related things going on. So I think I'm gonna rate the diabetes rep like 1 star, like not great. As for the overall book, I think I'm gonna rate it like 2 star? No, 2.5 maybe. Just with overall not a huge fan of the book. Obviously the diabetes stuff affects my rating, but also I just didn't love the writing, and I thought a lot of the dialogue and things were just weird and not realistic, which is obviously common in cozy mysteries. They're just so ridiculous, but like it was just like too much for me where it would kind of like take me out of the story. I also did guess the killer, not right from the beginning, but like I did figure it out before. Yeah, just not as funny as I would have liked, and I feel like I pretty much mentioned like all of my issues before, and they just never really got better. So I know this is a series. We'll just have to see if I continue the series because I am a completionist, so sometimes I just want to, even though I didn't love the book. So we'll see, but I'm not gonna rush to do it. Oh, the one good thing though that I forgot to mention is that it is a pretty diverse book, which I did enjoy seeing the different cultural representations. Like our main character is Filipino and her family is, and there's some other Asian representation as well, like from different areas of Asia. So that was good. And as I said, the food descriptions were good, but yeah, definitely my least favorite book of this vlog. So moving on tomorrow. Alright, halfway through Blood Sugar. I started this morning on the subway and I'm already halfway. So this is gonna be a really good, really quick read, and it's been my most highly anticipated read. So it's really exciting that it pretty much is living up to the hype so far. If you don't know what it's about, it is following a female serial killer, which is kind of common in thrillers, but I haven't read one that I can think of. So she has killed a few different people and never been caught for it, obviously, and then her husband dies and she is getting accused of his murder. However, she didn't kill him. It's this interesting thing where she has killed before. She is a murderer, but she didn't kill her husband, which is what they are accusing her of. It is a thriller, as I said, but it isn't a typical thriller. We're really just diving into our main character's life. Like, we're really just seeing her whole life, almost like a journal. We're just seeing her kind of narrate it, understanding her. It's like a character study on, can I even think of her name? Ruby, yeah. So that is interesting, and so we're seeing the few different murders that she's done throughout, and they've been pretty warranted, I have to say. As for the diabetic rep, we didn't have any until recently when she met her husband, as her husband's the one who's diabetic, and I know Sascha's husband in real life is diabetic, and that's what inspired her to write this. She just looked up the interview to confirm that. Basically, she was inspired when she was laying awake one night, couldn't sleep, because she was just thinking, like, what if my husband had a low blood sugar in the night and died in his sleep, which definitely could happen. So that's scary. But yeah, it's had some good quotes, which I have heard before in other reviews for this, but maybe I will just try to read out some of them. So sugar could kill him slowly, but was also needed to keep him alive in the moment. Sugar was constantly on his mind and in his pocket, and those action movies usually got it all wrong. A low blood sugar could lead to death in minutes. That's when the diabetics need sugar immediately. A soda, fruit juice, jelly beans, gummy bears, candy bars, and cookies are not ideal because the fat in them slows down the absorption of the sugar so desperately and urgently needed. So she's really educating in this. A high blood sugar wreaks havoc on the body and can lead to death, but it takes weeks or even months to fully shut down, which is the critique I had about Arsenic and Adobo, that you wouldn't just die instantly from a high blood sugar. It's a constant balancing act. Every flight of stairs, every common cold, every extra bite of mashed potatoes has to be accounted for to keep a type 1's blood sugar at a healthy level. Around 150, let's say. A healthy non-diabetic hovers around 90 before eating. Little did I realize on my very first date with Jason that his chronic disease was far more complicated, time-consuming, and frightening than him being a recovering alcoholic ever would have been. I realized with a bit of sadness for Jason that being a healthy type 1 diabetic took the same willpower, control, and maintenance as being a professional athlete does, but just to be average. So overall, the diabetic rep has been good. The only thing is, I wonder if Sascha's husband is just like this and that's why she included this, but Jason won't even have cake for his birthday. And I don't really love that because I feel like there's that stigma that type 1s can't have sugar, and it's not true, which I already talked about earlier. And the fact that he won't even eat cake on his birthday, you can have cake every once in a while, especially if it's your birthday, and just take insulin for it, and you'll be fine. So I don't know if maybe her husband is just really adamant about eating healthy and not really eating dessert, so that's her experience of type 1 diabetes, but you can have cake, especially on your birthday. But yeah, otherwise the writing's really good. I'm really intrigued by who really killed her husband if she didn't. I kind of assume it has something to do with his diabetes based on the title and everything, but very interesting book. Definitely enjoying it. Will finish tomorrow. Hey guys, yes, I'm in my pajamas again. Don't judge me. I realize I have not shown you guys an update regarding when I eat and do my meal bolus. So I thought I would show you dinner tonight. I'm a little out of routine. Normally my boyfriend's here cooking with me, but he's out somewhere. Don't really know what time he's gonna be home, but just thought I'd start cooking. So basically I have to carb count because carb turns into sugar. So I have to count how many carbs I'm eating, and then I'll take a bolus of insulin depending on how much carbs I'm having. So as you can imagine, that can be very annoying if you don't know how many carbs are in things when you get takeout and stuff like that. But when cooking at home today, it is easier because I actually know exactly what I'm having. I can look at the packages, and you're supposed to pre-bolus, which means giving your bolus ahead of time. So 20 or 30 minutes before, because insulin doesn't start working for about that amount of time. So you want to try and give it in advance if you can. Again, You can't always, you know, with eating takeout and stuff, you don't know when it's gonna come. So let's look at what we are having tonight. First of all, we're having some steaks. Meat is 0 carbs, so we don't have to count anything with that, so that's good. As for our vegetable, we're gonna have mushrooms, which again, vegetables are pretty low carb to no carb. So again, I'm not gonna count anything for that. Then we're doing potatoes, 1 potato each. Obviously it depends on the size of potato, but I would say for that size, cut into 2 pieces, it would be about 30 carbs at least. 25 or 30, I think I'm gonna say that it's 30. So pretty generally low carb meal here today. You know, sometimes it might be like 100 if I'm having like a bunch of pasta. So we're gonna take my PDM here. This is main thing here, so you're gonna hit bolus. And then you're gonna enter the amount of carbs. So like I said, it's just gonna be 30. And then for the rest of the calculation, you put in your current blood sugar, which I think mine was 10.6. I'm kind of forgetting, I just checked it before filming this. It was about 10.6. I was higher because I had pizza for lunch at work today. So we'll add that to the total. So it's saying my total is a 1.95 units. I do actually have some insulin on board already because my blood sugar was high. So they're taking that into account. Normally it would be like 2.6, but because I already have some insulin that I just gave myself recently, it's subtracting that. So I'm going to confirm this, start, and then it's going to deliver on my insulin pump, which I'm wearing right here, this little bump here on my stomach. So yeah. I'll keep making dinner. Sorry for being back in the bathroom, but I'm going to show you changing my insulin pump. So I have the Omnipod insulin pump. There's a bunch of different ones you can have, but this is the tubeless option, so it's the one I decided to go with. I'm currently wearing it on my belly here, and I change it every 3 days. There's going to be a lot of shifting, sorry. First of all, we have the PDM, which controls it, so we're going to turn this on. Basically, we're going to hit change pod. It's reminding me I need to change it, and deactivate the current pod. So now there's no active pod. So now we can take this one off. Here it is. This was the little cannula that was in me there. So now we will get rid of this and open up my new package. So it comes with the new pod and then a syringe to get my insulin. So put that on, take off the lid, and then just fill it with air for the amount that you want to put in your pod. Just put the minimum amount in, and then we have the little vial of insulin, and we are going to draw it out. So how can I show this? We're just gonna pull the insulin out to the amount I want it, and then we're gonna flick it to get rid of any air bubbles. All right, and now we have a syringe full of insulin. So then we're going to fill the pod with it. So there's a little hole here to inject the insulin. That beep means it's ready to go. So we will also be getting rid of this. So now we have to sync the pod with my PDM. So we're gonna go to set up a new pod. It says to fill it with insulin. I already did that. Next, now it's gonna communicate with pod. So I'm gonna put these beside each other for a few minutes while they sort of like connect and sync. While waiting, this is normally the time where I will go put my insulin back in the fridge because it needs to be cold, or else it will start to go bad. And then I will get rid of these, put this in my Sharps container to get rid of it safely because it is a needle. And then they have this recycling program where I can send these back to the company and then they will like recycle them somehow. I don't know. There's a lot of waste that comes with type 1 diabetes, so it's nice that they have that like recycling program, so I'm not just throwing them all in the trash. As for placement, I think I'm going to put the next one again on my stomach. It's the best site for me in terms of absorption. Sometimes when I put it other places, the insulin just doesn't absorb or work as well. Also, there's quite a bit of like area on the stomach, so it's a pretty good site to use. Sometimes it gets annoying with my pants, like you want to avoid your pant line. But yeah, so now it is synced, so you can put it on. It has little instructions. You can keep track of where you last put it, so you don't put it the same place. That's really important to spread it out, or else you'll get like scarring and stuff like that. Bit of a red dot there. Okay, so we'll take this blue thing off, and then we take the sticky parts off, and then we're gonna place it. Just do the other side here. So now it is on. So I'll just hit start on my PDM, and then you just have to hit confirm. And then that little cannula that I showed you guys is gonna automatically poke into my skin. So sometimes it hurts, sometimes it doesn't hurt that much. Let's see how it goes. Okay, not too bad today. And now I'm ready for another 3 days. So obviously this is just so I don't have to be stabbing myself with a needle every time I need insulin. It's just in this little pod here, and then I can bolus with my PDM. Should I do diabetes ASMR? Alright guys, here I am sitting in front of my Christmas tree, which we put up this week, and I finished blood sugar. So her husband did die from a diabetic related reason, which not really a spoiler, pretty obvious from the title and everything. But as a diabetic, like, kind of scared me. Like, he died in a way I never really like thought of before for myself, so a little spooked by that. But otherwise this book was not super thrillery or scary. But yeah, the diabetic rep was good. Her cat ends up getting diagnosed as well, so we had some like animal diabetic rep too. And I know I had a little bit of issue with it with the whole cake thing, but I think I will just give it 5 stars in terms of the diabetic rep, because there were some really good quotes, and I really do like what Sascha was trying to get across about the disease. As for my overall rating, I think I'm gonna give it a 4 star, so probably 3.5, but then the diabetes stuff amped it up to a 4 because I do feel slightly disappointed with it. It was very, very hyped up for me, so I think that's why I was a little bit disappointed. But also the second half was just so slow, and Peach is eating the treat. Yeah, the second half was definitely slow. I was like, okay, like let's just get to it. And then I was really hoping there'd be some sort of cool twist at the end to make it all worth it, and there wasn't really. Like, there was a slight twist, but nothing huge. It really was just Peach. It really was just a character study on Ruby, and it was entertaining, so 4 stars, which makes it the best book of this vlog so far. Now just one more book left, and I'm excited. It is Sweetblood. Okay, great rep so far. I just thought I'd read out some of this one page. When I was a little kid, I loved the block parties, except for the part where my mother, the food cop, showed me all the things I couldn't eat. No jello, no brownies, no lemonade, no fruit salad, beans and brats, that was it. According to the food police, sugar was as dangerous as heroin and arsenic combined. Now, of course, she's more enlightened. We undead, she thinks she's undead, can eat like ordinary people as long as we add enough insulin to the system, but my mom still gets that panicky look whenever she sees me eating a cookie. The thing about non-diabetics is that no matter how many times you explain the whole blood glucose, insulin, food thing to them, they just don't get it. First off, they think that because it comes down to the numbers and equations, you ought to be able to control it. Well, I can control it, the same way you can control how many potato chips you eat, or your temper, or a 6-month-old puppy. Sometimes there's just not much you can do. I take 3 or 4 or 5 shots a day. Every morning I take a dose of long-acting insulin. That's the background insulin that lasts all day. Then whenever I eat, I take a few units of fast-acting insulin depending on how many grams of carbohydrate I'm about to consume. Sounds simple, but there's hardly a week when I don't mess up. Any little thing can throw off the numbers, stress, hormones, exercise, illness, you name it. Alright, I'm about halfway through Sweetblood already. As you can see, it is pretty short. I think it's categorized as YA, but I would honestly say it's giving middle grade vibes. And if you can see the font, like, it's very big. So it's gonna be a quick one, and it's only 180 pages as well. I am definitely loving it. This is majorly focused on type 1 diabetes. Like, it has the most focus on the disease out of any of the books that I've read in this vlog, and I'm really enjoying that. The basic premise is about this girl named Lucy. She's 16 years old. She has diabetes and has had it for like 10 years. Recently, she has been starting to like slack off in school and just be feeling really sad. Like, I think she's depressed. I think it's gonna be, you know, a focus on her mental health, but she's feeling like, you know, her parents hate her, like she's a burden to them and that kind of thing. And she's also like obsessed with vampires. Honestly relatable. I feel like when I was her age, like I was loving vampires and wanting to be one, and she genuinely thinks that she is one because her theory is that vampire lore and like the mythology of vampires came from type 1 diabetics back in the day, like before there was medical treatment for them. She just feels like a lot of the symptoms of untreated diabetes is similar to vampirism basically, so she thinks type 1 diabetics are vampires. And it's sort of interesting, like she considers herself undead because she should be dead if not for medical advances and the creation of insulin. And basically anyone that has been saved from like technology or medicine, such as her dad who almost died of something else, she considers them like the undead because they almost died or like they should be dead kind of thing. Interesting way of thinking about it. She's a very unique, quirky girl and it's a pretty funny book as well, despite dealing with chronic illness and mental illness. Like it's pretty funny. A lot of the things she says crack me up. Like she was drinking a juice box and she called it her blood box, and that's what she calls cranberry juice. Like, I don't know. It's fun, and I thought the outdatedness would be worse than it is, but they did talk about insulin pumps in here, so I guess those existed back then. Obviously, I don't really know about that because I was just diagnosed last year. There's no talk of continuous glucose monitors, so I think that must be a more new thing. She does only test her blood sugars with the finger pricking in this, but this is like a really, really accurate representation of diabetes. And right off the bat, I'm giving it 5 stars for the diabetic rep. It is better than like any of the other books, I would say. It just has a more real vibe, and it's showing like the hardships of it without being too over the top, like in blood sugar, where it really was telling you like how bad it is and how you could die and stuff. Like this has a more like comedic sense whilst also saying that. So I don't know, as a diabetic, it's like it's more fun because it's not super doom and gloom like showing someone actually die from diabetes, which was, you know, kind of upsetting in the last book. This is a little bit more fun, lighthearted. You know, she doesn't have perfect blood sugars like freaking Jason from Blood Sugar, who clearly was keeping it tight. Like her blood sugars are all over the place, really up, really down, and I just feel like that's kind of nice to read about, like a diabetic who doesn't have their blood sugars under control all the time, because that's just more of the reality for a lot of people. It's really hard to keep them perfect all the time, so it's kind of nice to see that. And she also goes on an online chat room and talks to people who say that they are a vampire or they just talk about vampires. She just got invited to this goth party, so I think she's gonna get even more into like trouble and interacting with people who think they're vampires and are very into vampires, and probably slacking off even more in school and getting more into trouble. It was really sad. Apparently her parents told her that they didn't have any more kids because they didn't want to bring another diabetic child into the world, which I think is like a really heavy thing to tell someone, that they don't want to have another child that has the same disease as you. Like I see why she feels this burden, and like her parents hate her for her disease. It's definitely sad, but I feel like it's a classic thing where the teenagers are not understanding the parents and the parents aren't understanding the teenagers. Like I think the parents are just really, really worried about her and really kind of overprotective and overly critical because they just are so worried for her and her health. Anyways, I'm blabbering on about this, but this is great. Like this is very, very good. The only thing would be that it is reading pretty juvenile. As I said, like it does feel like a middle grade book, but I'm really loving it. Okay, I have finished Sweetblood. Gosh, I haven't even thought about my rating. I like just finished it. Maybe I'd give it 4 stars. Yeah, Lucy definitely got into some trouble in this. There were definitely some lessons that Pete was trying to teach the reader. One of them definitely being internet stranger danger. I think I mentioned she was on some chat rooms. A plotline did end up happening where there was a creeper that she was talking to that ended up finding out who she was in real life because she revealed too much information online. That was definitely a message in here. And then also about drinking, I guess just generally like about alcohol safety for like young people to not overdrink, but then especially with diabetes, there was a point where she was really drunk, and so she couldn't tell if she was drunk or if she was having symptoms of a low blood sugar, because obviously when your thinking is impaired, you cannot tell what your symptoms are properly if you are not like thinking properly. Anyways, so it was really, really focused on the fact that she was diabetic, so I absolutely loved that. I think if you are diabetic, especially a new diabetic, this would be a really, really good book for you. Or if you're a teenager growing up with diabetes, I think this would be great because you could really, really relate to her. So I highly recommend this for any young diabetics out there, or if there's anyone that you know who is. But this was really stressing me out. Like, this girl was not checking her blood sugars, and it was like insane to me because I like to check them so often with my little CGM that I've shown you guys, but she didn't have that. So she was just relying on the finger pricking, which obviously you can't do that as often as you can check with your CGM. I don't know, I just feel so glad that I was diagnosed during this time and not in the past when there wasn't as good of technology, because that's just really scary to think of going for like so long without checking your blood sugar or knowing where you're at, which is what she was doing, and it was very scary. And she ended up having a DKA, which I have talked about, kind of whatever, that's kind of a spoiler. Yeah, 5 stars for the type 1 rep, probably 4 stars overall. That brings us to the end of this video finally. I'm so sorry it is such a long video. I hope some of you have stuck with me here. Thank you so much for watching. If you have made it this far, please leave me a comment letting me know if there's any books with type 1 rep that you have read or you have seen out there. I'd love to read more of them. Or let me know something that you learned in this video about diabetes. Or as always, comment about the books if you'd like. I'm personally glad to be taking a break from reading about diabetes now. I was reading this about her struggles, and then I had a high blood sugar alert, and it's like, okay, I'm living the diabetic life, so I kind of want to take a break from reading it because it's just a constant thing. But I definitely appreciated seeing the diabetic experience in these books, and honestly I think I recommend all of them except Arsenic and Adobo. That's all from me. See you in my next video. Bye.